Mount Everest rose up after the flood. The Himalayan range didn't exist until after the flood. The earth didn't have any giant mountain ranges, and it didn't have any deep ocean basins. So the argument will come up, well, hey, is there enough water, could it rain enough to cover Mount Everest? No, you're thinking of the wrong world. Scoffers are ignorant of what the original creation was like, and they're ignorant of the flood. The mountains rose after the flood, and the valleys sank down. The water raced off into those holes. Is there another? Yeah, switch to the next one there real quick, brother. I got about, how much, 4 minutes left?
Yes.
Okay, I'll try to get through this Mount St. Helens real quickly and give you an example of what might happen. So the people will say that the idea of the worldwide flood is impossible. Haven't really studied the evidence. There are sedimentary rock all over the world, and petrified clams in the closed position are very common. And I'll have to skip some of this, but the center part of the oceans, the abyss, is the deep part. The other part is called the continental shelf, where it's not as deep. About half of the ocean, here, at least at the Arctic Ocean, is the abyss. The other half is continental shelf. The oceans were smaller after the flood, I believe, for a while, because the textbooks all say here, millions of years it took the Colorado River to carve the Grand Canyon from solid rock. Well, they're basing that on a couple of faulty assumptions. They're basing on the assumption that the Colorado River didn't start on it until after the rock was solid rock. If it was all soft mud, and those are obviously mud layers turned to solid rock, then the erosion would be very rapid. Mount St. Helens did that. When it blew in 1980, the top of the mountain began to blow, and then the north slope slid down. And the volcano made a mudslide. Scalding hot mud and ash slid down for many miles. Matter of fact, this computer image, the mud slid all the way down and blocked off the Toutle River. Here's a picture of the mud dam blocking off the Toutle River. 5 days later, the water backed up over the top and went over the top of the dam. Here you have lots of water behind a soft mud dam, and erosion was very rapid. It carved a canyon 140 feet deep, 1,000 feet wide, 2,000 feet long, and it carved it out in 15 minutes. When the scientists went down into the canyon after water got back to stabilize, they noticed the canyon sides of it were all stratified, all nice, neat layers. That's because as the mud flowed in, hydrologic sorting automatically separates the particles by density. Heavier stuff went to the bottom, and you can go there today, and some geologists will say, oh, this bottom layer is 800 million years old. And it was all formed in 1980, rapidly. Textbooks always say the Grand Canyon is kind of puzzling because it loops like a slow gradient. Mississippi loops and meanders around because it's low gradient, but it also has steep sides like a fast-moving high gradient stream. They say it's kind of puzzling. How did this canyon form? Well, see, they're thinking of it all wrong. The Colorado River did not make Grand Canyon. The flood made Grand Canyon. The Colorado River just happens to flow through the crack, that's all. The logs that were floated in Spirit Lake, here's Mount St. Helens in the background, the logs floated 3 square miles of logs floated there. Many of them got waterlogged and began to float in the upright position and then sank to the bottom. Remember I showed you the polystrata trees running through all the different layers of strata? That formed during the flood. All those layers deposited rapidly. Mount St. Helens is doing the very same thing for us today. Scuba divers go under there and say there are 20,000 logs in the bottom of Spirit Lake right now, stuck in the mud. All over the world you can find tree trunks petrified in the standing position. Yellowstone has hundreds of them. If they fall over, they will break. And you go through any petrified forest and you'll see the tree probably petrified standing up and then fell over a couple of hundred years later. I think my time is up. After the flood, the waters assuaged and the waters returned from off the earth. The water, as the mountains rose and the valleys sank down, the water would tend to race back and forth for a while. It says that in Genesis chapter 3. And the secondary erosion would take place as the layers were wiped off and new layers deposited on top from the waters going back and forth. It wasn't safe for Noah to get out of the ark for a short time. And all of these features of this millions of years ago stuff ought to be illegal in our textbooks. It has nothing to do with science, and you cannot prove those layers are millions of years old. That whole geologic column is the Bible to the evolutionist, and it's a fraud, it's a hoax, it does not exist any place. That book, the Bible explanation, the worldwide flood, is the best, most reasonable explanation of all the features we see on this world today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Hovind. I fully intended to say at the beginning of this debate that, as has been shown already, I would expect you to give your kind attention to both of our speakers, and please be mindful that they are holding the floor and that we need to give them the utmost in respect and the allowance of the full use of their time. So at this time, we'll hear from Mr. Till.
Dr. Hovind, Mr. Helen, and ladies and gentlemen. I want to begin by expressing my appreciation for the opportunity to be here. I think it's very commendable that this congregation is willing to invite me here, because it has to know that I'm going to say some things that are directly opposed to what this church stands for. And I wanted to express my appreciation before anything else was said. I also extend my sympathy to Dr. Hovind on the death of his father, which many of you perhaps knew even before he mentioned it. As one who experienced the same loss in his life, I know what he must be feeling. And I appreciate his keeping the commitment to be here, even though that tragedy happened in his life. Be that as it may, I hope the audience will understand that this is a public debate and that we are both very firmly committed to what we believe. And I hope none of you will think that if I press the issue that I am in any way attacking him personally, because that is not my intention. One thing that I regretted was that he did not read and define the proposition, and after listening to his speech, I think I know why. I think he wanted to discuss his creation science theory more than he wanted to debate the proposition that we agreed to debate. That proposition reads like this: the Genesis story of the worldwide flood is scientifically accurate in all of its details. The word scientifically is a key word that needs definition. Obviously, this word comes from the noun science, and science is an investigation, examination of scientific phenomena. Scientific phenomena are those things that occur naturally according to the interaction of the laws of nature. And if you would read the very first verse with which the story of Noah's flood begins, you'll see that he has a big problem on his hands. If you have your Bibles with you, turn to Genesis 6:13, and let's notice what it says. And God said to Noah. And God said to Noah. When you have God speaking to men, and when you have men speaking to gods, you have left the realm of the natural and you have entered the realm of the unnatural or the supernatural. So we see that the story of Noah's flood begins with a fact that cannot be considered scientific, because it has nothing at all to do with the laws of nature. And he also referred to the place in the Genesis story where it says that God sent a wind to dry the surface of the earth. If God sent a wind, then this was not a natural phenomenon, and therefore it cannot be a scientific detail. I want you to understand that his commitment is to prove that all of the details in the Genesis story of the flood were scientifically accurate. And I saw a little effort on his part to say the Genesis story of the flood says this, and here's why it can be considered scientific. And the Genesis story of the flood has to say this, and it can be considered scientific because of this, and this, and this. That was what I expected him to try to do. I'm going to show you in just a minute how that it's absolutely impossible for this event to have occurred as it is recorded in the Bible, and that we can absolutely know that it was impossible for this event to have occurred as the Bible records it. But first I want to make some comments on the remarks that he made. He said the reason why people reject the Bible is that they want to live a loose life. Well, I sort of consider that to be insulting, and I'm not even going to bother to comment on that. But it's not the first time that people have said that to me. And I'm perfectly willing to compare my morality to his or anyone else who claims to be a Christian any time that people want to do that. He read from Genesis 1, and he told us that there was a canopy of water above the earth back then. What was his evidence? What was his scientific proof that such a canopy of water existed at that time? I didn't hear him present any such proof that such a thing as that existed. He showed us some slides to indicate that animals were huge in the past, and I'm not going to deny that that is so. I know that animals tended to be large in the past. After all, we have the age of the dinosaurs. But that is a far cry from proving that people lived to be 900 years old, as the book of Genesis tells us that they did. But be that as it may, none of this has anything at all to do with the Genesis flood as it is recorded in the Bible, and that is the thing that he is supposed to be proving. I was very happy to see him refer to petrified trees that have been found standing in place. And I was a little bit surprised that he referred to Yellowstone Park as an example of a place where you can go to find these. I just wish that he had tried to go more into detail on what is found at a place called Specimen Ridge in Yellowstone Park. At Specimen Ridge, there are 27 petrified forests standing on top of each other with a layer of volcanic ash in between. And these are not trees that floated in the water during the Great Flood for a period of time and then sank to the bottom standing upright. Because geologists have discovered that many of these trees are in place with their root system petrified in the layer of rocks that they are sitting in. And 27 forests with a layer of ash, one on top of the other, are to be found in this place. Many of the trees have been examined, and the rings indicate that the oldest were 500 years old in each layer. We'll multiply 27 by 500 and you get more time than his creationist theory will allow. And also it's a known fact that it takes about 200 years for a volcanic deposit to decay so that it's suitable for plants to take root in. So you multiply that into your formula and you see you have about 20,000 years, and that's just about 2 times too long for his creationist theory. Anyway, in the time that I have, I want to develop a point, and I want you to listen very carefully to this. He showed you a model of the ark, and I'm going to prove to you that it is impossible that any such boat as that was ever made. God said to Noah, that is unscientific, but what did God say to Noah? Well, he told him to build an ark, and he told him to make it, and I'm going to translate everything into feet. He told him to make it 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet tall. Could a man living back at that time have built such a boat as this? To put this in its proper perspective, I'm going to ask you to imagine this in a modern setting. Let's say that you're a member of a family of 8, because there were 8 members in Noah's family. And let's just assume that God appeared to you one day and he said, I'm going to destroy the world by a flood, and I want you to build a boat out of gopher wood, whatever kind of wood that was, and I want you to make it 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. You would have a tremendous advantage over Noah. You'd be able to go to Walmart, you'd be able to go to Kmart, you'd be able to go to Ace Hardware or such places as this and buy the most sophisticated tools that have ever existed. Power saws, band saws, planers, crowbars, steel hammers, and so on. You'd be able to go to the lumber yard and you'd be able to buy pre-cut lumber You wouldn't have to hack your beans out of the